my late husband, Frank, built our family cabin with his own 2 hands. Every cedar plank, every fieldstone in that fireplace, was a testament to his love for us. A legacy meant to last for generations. He always said it was our family's anchor. I never imagined my own son would be the one to try and cut the rope. Handing me a realtor's contract with one hand while his wife held a calculator in the other. And when he told me to just be practical and sign away his father's soul for a quick payday, I found a strength I never knew I had. A strength born from the 2 devastating secrets I'd just uncovered. But let me start from the beginning. Because the cracks in our family foundation started to show long before that final terrible weekend. The silence was the first thing I noticed after Frank passed. It was a physical presence in our little Asheville home, thick and heavy in the air. For 40 years, this house had been filled with the sounds of his life, the low rumble of the news on the TV, the rhythmic sanding of wood from his workshop in the garage, his off-key whistling to old country songs. Now, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. It had been 6 months, and the grief was still a raw, open wound. I was sitting in his favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather that still faintly smelled of his pipe tobacco and sawdust, tracing the rim of his empty coffee mug. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains were painted in the soft hues of an early autumn morning. Frank had loved this time of year. He would have been planning our annual trip up to the cabin to watch the leaves change. A tradition we'd held since our son, Leo, was just a boy. The thought sent a fresh wave of sorrow through me. That's when the phone rang. Its chime unnaturally loud in the quiet house. It was Leo. "Hey, Mom, how are you holding up?" he asked. His voice, coming all the way from his high-rise apartment in Chicago, always sounded a little distant, a little rushed. "Oh, you know, same old, I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "Just enjoying the mountain view." "That's good, that's great," he said quickly. Then, a pause. I knew this pause. It was the one that came before he had to ask for something. Or before his wife, Jenna, got on the line. "Jenna's here. She says hi," he said, and then her voice, smooth and polished as river stone, took over. "Carolyn, how are you, sweetie? We were just thinking about you," she said. Her sweetness always felt like it had sharp edges. "Actually, that's why we're calling. We've been talking, and, well, with winter coming, we're a little worried about the cabin." I stiffened. The cabin, our sanctuary. Worried how? "Well, it's just sitting up there empty," she continued, her tone dripping with practiced concern. "The pipes could freeze, and the upkeep, it just seems like such a burden for you to handle all alone right now. Emotionally, and, financially." The subtext was as clear as the mountain air. This wasn't about frozen pipes. This was about money. Leo and Jenna had been struggling since they moved to Chicago. The cost of living, their student loans. Frank and I had helped them with a down payment on their condo. But I knew things were still tight. "Frank and I always managed just fine," I said, my voice a little cooler than I intended. "I was actually thinking of driving up next week to air it out." "That's a great idea," Leo chimed back in, a little too enthusiastically. "Actually, Jen and I were thinking we could drive down this weekend, help you go through some of Dad's things. Sort what to keep, what to let go of." Let go of. The phrase landed like a stone in my gut. They weren't talking about old fishing gear and flannel shirts. It might be a good time to get it appraised, too, Jenna added, her voice casual, "just to know what our options are. The market in that area is just wild right now. People are paying cash, way over asking price. It could really set you up for a comfortable future." Carolyn, set us all up. There it was. The quiet hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a roar in my ears. They wanted to sell it. Sell the place where Leo took his first steps on the braided rug Frank's mother made. The place where Frank carved my initials into the porch railing the day we closed on it. They wanted to put a price tag on our entire life together. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that, Jenna," I said, my grip tightening on Frank's empty mug. "Of course," she cooed, backtracking immediately. "We're just brainstorming, trying to be helpful. The last thing we want is to pressure you. We just love you and want to make sure you're taken care of." The call ended a few minutes later with promises to see me on Friday. I hung up the phone and stared out the window. But I wasn't seeing the mountains anymore. I was seeing Frank's face. The pride in his eyes the day he finished the stone fireplace. I could almost hear his voice, echoing in the deafening silence of the house. This place is our anchor. Carolyn, don't ever let it go. And in that moment, I felt a new emotion push through the fog of grief, a cold, sharp spike of dread. My son and his wife were coming to help me let go. But it felt more like they were coming to pry my husband's legacy from my hands. The 2 days leading up to their arrival were agonizing. Every time the phone rang, I flinched, expecting another, gentle, push. I spent the time preparing, not meals, but my own resolve. I packed a small overnight bag with Frank's favorite flannel shirt, a thermos for coffee, and a heavy photo album, fortifying myself with memories for the battle I feared was coming. Friday afternoon, a sleek, silver sedan, a car far too clean for our gravel driveway, pulled up. Leo got out first, looking tired, the city etched into the lines around his eyes. He wrapped me in a hug that felt both desperate and hesitant, like he was caught between two worlds. And then came Jenna, emerging from the passenger side like a model in a car commercial. She was wearing expensive-looking athletic wear that had clearly never seen a hiking trail. Her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. "Carolyn, it's so good to see you," she said, giving me that same breezy air kiss from the phone call. Her eyes, however, scanned our small home, the porch swing Frank built, the slightly peeling paint on the window trim. It wasn't the look of someone visiting family, it was the look of an appraiser. The drive up to the cabin was filled with a strained cheerfulness. Jenna chattered about the booming real estate market in the mountains, pointing out renovated A-frames and new constructions. "Can you believe what these places are going for, Leo? It's like a gold rush," she'd say, her voice bright. Leo would just grip the steering wheel tighter and murmur, "Yeah, it's wild." I said nothing, just watched the familiar landmarks pass by, the old general store with the rusty Coca-Cola sign, the sharp turn by Miller's Creek, the towering pine tree Frank always called the General. Each one was a chapter in a book they were trying to close. The moment I unlocked the cabin door, the scent of cedar, old paper, and cold stone washed over me, a perfume of 40 years of love. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light slanting through the windows. For me, it was like coming home. For Jenna, it was an inventory. "Wow, the bones are great," she said, walking through the main room and running a manicured finger along the fireplace mantel. "Great bones. We just need to open up this wall. Maybe replace these old windows, the return on investment would be incredible." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Not of the family photos on the wall or the silly height chart for Leo we'd marked in a doorframe. She took pictures of the antique rocking chair, the hand-carved decoy ducks Frank had made, the cast-iron stove. With every flash, a piece of my history felt like it was being catalogued for sale. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching a stranger tag my most cherished possessions for an estate sale. This old fishing creel could be a great decorative piece for a rustic chic loft, she mused, angling her phone. "I bet I could get $100 for it online. Easy." Leo saw the look on my face. "Jen, maybe we can slow down a bit," he said, his voice low. "Let Mom breathe." "What? I'm just being efficient, sweetie," she said, not looking up from her screen. "We only have the weekend. We have to be practical." Practical. That word again. The word they used to justify erasing a lifetime. Just as the tension was becoming unbearable, a familiar beat-up pickup truck rattled up the path. It was my niece, Maria, Leo's cousin. She jumped out with a warm smile, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Aunt Carolyn, I figured you all could use a real mountain dinner," she said, giving me a proper, heartfelt hug. The basket was filled with her famous fried chicken, coleslaw, and a jug of sweet tea. Her presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. She was real. She was grounded. "Leo, Jenna, good to see you," she said, though her smile tightened slightly when she saw Jenna still snapping photos of the furniture. "Cataloging the loot?" Maria asked, her tone light but with an unmistakable edge. Jenna's smile was instant but brittle. Just documenting, for insurance purposes. The lie hung in the dusty air between them. Maria turned her back on Jenna and walked over to the wall of photos. "Oh, I love this one," she said, her voice softening. "Remember this, Aunt Carolyn? The day Uncle Frank caught that huge trout and we all pretended it wasn't half as big as his story." She was pulling us back. Back to the memories. Back to the heart of what this place was. We talked for a few minutes about that day. Laughing. And for a moment, the cabin felt like ours again. Jenna stood off to the side, scrolling through her phone, completely removed from the warmth of the memory. She was an outsider, and Maria's presence made it glaringly obvious. The sadness in my chest was immense. Watching my son stand silently between the woman who held his heart and the woman who held his history. Looking utterly lost. Maria's visit was a brief, warm truce in a Cold War one hadn't even agreed to fight. After she left, taking her basket and the scent of genuine warmth with her, the cabin's atmosphere grew heavy again. We made small talk over the last of her fried chicken, the words feeling brittle and hollow. Jenna talked about a new restaurant in Chicago that served deconstructed Southern food for $200 a plate. While I could only think of the 50-cent Cokes Frank and I used to share on this very porch. That night, I gave them the master bedroom and took the small guest room. The one with the lumpy mattress. I lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sound of their muffled voices through the thin wooden walls. Feeling like a visitor in the heart of my own life. The next morning, we tackled the workshop. This was the place I dreaded most. It was Frank's sanctuary, a place so thoroughly him that stepping inside felt like walking into his embrace. The air was thick with the holy trinity of his favorite smells, cedar shavings, turpentine, and coffee. His tools hung in their perfect, ordered places on the pegboard walls. A half-finished rocking horse, destined for a grandchild we never had, sat on his workbench, a fine layer of dust covering its smooth, sanded curves. My throat tightened. This wasn't a room full of things, it was a room full of his unfinished sentences. Leo felt it, too. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped, and ran a hand over his face. "Wow," he whispered. "It's like he just stepped out for a minute." Jenna, however, saw it differently. "Okay, so there's a lot of potential here," she said, her voice echoing too loudly in the sacred quiet. "Vintage tools are a hot market. We could bundle them, and this workbench, solid maple. We could get a great price for it from some hipster furniture maker in the city." She moved through the space with a brisk, proprietary air, picking things up, assessing their value. I felt a silent scream building in my chest. She was auctioning off my husband's ghost right in front of me. Then, it happened. She was reaching for a set of antique wood planes on a high shelf above a row of pottery Frank had thrown during his brief but passionate ceramics phase. "These are clunky," she said, pulling one down carelessly. Her elbow bumped the shelf. A small, cobalt blue pot, one of Frank's favorites for its uniquely imperfect shape, wobbled for a second before tumbling to the concrete floor. The sound of it shattering was like a gunshot in the silent workshop. Shards of deep blue scattered like broken bits of sky at our feet. For a heart-stopping moment, nobody moved. I stared at the pieces, my mind flashing back to the day Frank had pulled it from the kiln. His face beaming with pride. "It's got character, Carolyn," he'd said, tracing the lopsided rim, "just like us." "Oops," Jenna said, "just that. Clumsy me." She nudged a piece with the toe of her expensive sneaker. She didn't look at me, didn't apologize for breaking a piece of my husband's soul. Instead, she looked at the remaining pots on the shelf. "Well, it's a shame, but honestly, his technique was a little amateurish. If we were to sell this collection, we'd be better off leading with a piece from a professional artist. It would drive up the value of the whole lot." The cold, transactional nature of her words sucked the air from my lungs. She hadn't just broken a pot, she had dismissed the man who made it. She had erased the love, the effort, the joy, and replaced it with a price tag. "Jenna," Leo said, his voice tight with shame. "That was one of Dad's favorites." "Mom, I'm so sorry." I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, bending down to pick up the largest piece of the broken pot. Its sharp edge cold against my palm. I wrapped it in an old rag from Frank's workbench and tucked it into my pocket. Don't be silly, Leo. It's just a thing, Jenna said dismissively. Come on, let's focus on the big-ticket items. I walked out. I couldn't be in that room with her for another second. I went to the small kitchen to make a pot of coffee. My hands shaking with a rage so profound it felt like grief. A few minutes later, I heard their voices from the living room. Low and urgent. I stood just out of sight in the narrow hallway, my back pressed against the cool pine walls. Can't you just be a little more sensitive? Leo was pleading, his voice a strained whisper. You saw her face. This is hard enough for her without you acting like a vulture. A vulture? I'm being practical. Leo. Jenna's voice was a furious hiss. I'm sorry, but we don't have the luxury of being sentimental right now. Do you want another threatening letter? Do you want them to call my parents again? Because that's what's going to happen if we leave here empty-handed. A cold dread washed over me. Threatening letter? I know. Leo sighed, his voice heavy with defeat. But this is my dad's stuff. It's my mom's heart we're ripping out. And what about our life? Jenna shot back, her voice cracking with a desperate edge I hadn't heard before. What about the hole we're in? You don't get it. This isn't a choice. Selling this place, selling all of this, it's our only way out. The words hung in the air, sharp and terrifying. Only way out. It wasn't about making my life easier. It wasn't about a smart investment. It was about something far darker. A secret so big they were willing to shatter a family, and a mother's heart, to keep it buried. After their hushed argument, Leo and Jenna emerged from the living room wearing fragile, artificial smiles. The rest of the day was a masterclass in avoidance. We moved around each other in the confined space of the cabin. The air thick with unspoken words. Jenna busied herself wiping down counters that were already clean. Leo chopped an unnecessary amount of firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe sounding like a countdown. I retreated to the porch, wrapping myself in one of Frank's old wool blankets. The broken piece of pottery a hard lump in my pocket. The phrase I'd overheard echoed in my mind on a loop, our only way out. That evening, a merciful fog rolled down from the mountains, blanketing us in a soft, gray isolation. It felt appropriate. We ate a silent dinner of canned soup and crackers. The tension was so thick I could barely swallow. The next morning, Jenna announced they were driving into Asheville to pick up some decent coffee and groceries. Her tone implied that my pantry, stocked with Frank's favorite Maxwell House and cans of chili, was somehow a personal failing. We'll be gone a couple of hours, Leo said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. You just relax, Mom. The moment their car disappeared down the gravel path, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The cabin was mine again. The silence was no longer tense, but peaceful. I poured myself a cup of the indecent coffee, and the familiar, bitter taste was comforting. I knew I couldn't relax. Jenna's desperate words had planted a splinter in my mind, and I couldn't rest until I understood the truth. Her mention of a threatening letter led me to one place, Frank's desk. It was a beautiful, antique roll top he'd restored himself, sitting in a small nook overlooking the creek. It was his command center, the place he paid bills, sketched out woodworking designs, and wrote me little love notes on sticky pads. My heart ached as I sat in his worn leather chair. It felt like a violation to go through his private space, but a deeper instinct told me the answers I needed were in there. I rolled up the heavy, slatted cover. The scent of old paper, ink, and cherry wood filled the air. Everything was just as he'd left it. Neat stacks of receipts, a cup full of sharpened pencils, a half-finished crossword puzzle. I went through the main drawers first, finding nothing but old bank statements, warranties for appliances, and letters from friends. For a moment, I thought I was wrong, that I had imagined the desperation in Jenna's voice. But Frank was a man of secrets and craftsmanship. I ran my hand along the inside of the knee-hole, just as I'd seen him do 100 times when he was deep in thought. My fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible indentation in the wood. I pressed it. A faint click echoed in the quiet room, and a thin, vertical panel on the side of the desk popped open, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a shoebox. My breath caught in my throat. Inside was a small, bundled stack of papers held together by a thick rubber band. It wasn't tied with a ribbon or placed in a keepsake box. This was not a place for sentiment. This was a place for things that needed to be hidden. My hands trembled as I lifted the bundle out. The paper on top wasn't a love letter. It was a printout of an email. The subject line in stark, computer-generated letters, third and final notice, loan default action. I unfolded it. It was from a venture capital firm in Chicago, addressed to Ms. Jenna Riley. It spoke of a failed tech startup, a business loan of $100,000, and impending legal action. My blood ran cold. I worked my way through the stack. There were more emails, each more threatening than the last. Then came the letters on official letterhead, printed with angry, red ink. Final notice before legal proceedings. These were from a different company, a collections agency, regarding medical debts for Jenna's parents in Ohio. Another $50,000. The numbers swam before my eyes. Dizzying and unreal. $150. The last few pages were the worst. They were printouts of emails between the collection agency and Frank. They had somehow tracked Jenna to us and started contacting him a few months before he died. As a family member, we believe you'll want to help Ms. Riley resolve this serious financial matter before we are forced to pursue wage garnishment and asset seizure. I sank back into the chair. The letters spread across the desk like a verdict. This was it. This was the secret. This was the only way out. The push to sell the cabin. The talk of the wild market. Jenna's cold, transactional appraisal of every object. It wasn't just greed. It was a desperate, frantic scramble to outrun an avalanche of debt that was about to bury them. Frank had known. He had been carrying this terrible secret. He was trying to protect me, and in doing so, had been fielding these threats alone in the last months of his life. The shattering of the blue pot suddenly made a new, horrifying kind of sense. In Jenna's eyes, it wasn't a memory. It was just a few potential dollars when she needed thousands. It was worthless. All of this, the history, the love, the legacy baked into the very walls of this cabin, it was all just an obstacle standing between her and solvency. I looked at the letters again. At the cold, hard number that had turned my daughter-in-law into a predator and my son into her unwilling accomplice. The grief for my husband was now intertwined with a profound, chilling, and absolute sense of betrayal. I sat there for I don't know how long. The silence of the cabin broken only by the frantic shuffling of paper as I read and reread the letters. Each page was a new layer of deceit. The woman my son had married was a stranger. And the financial hole they were in wasn't a pothole, it was a canyon. I carefully gathered the letters, the harsh red ink of the final notices feeling hot to the touch, and walked into the main room. I spread them out across the heavy pine dining table Frank had built, arranging them like place settings at a funeral. Then I sat down to wait. I heard the crunch of their car on the gravel path a little while later. The front door opened and they came in, arms full of grocery bags, their laughter echoing falsely in the tense quiet of the cabin. "Mom, we got that fancy dark roast you secretly like," Leo said, his voice full of forced cheer. "And Jenna found some." He stopped short. Both of them froze in the entryway, their smiles dissolving as they saw me sitting at the table. My face set like stone. Their eyes fell to the papers spread across the wood. I saw the color drain from Jenna's face first. She knew exactly what they were. What's all this?" Leo asked, setting the bags down slowly. But his eyes were locked on Jenna. I didn't look at him. My gaze was fixed on my daughter-in-law. "I believe these are for you, Jenna," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. I slid the topmost letter, the one about the impending legal action, across the table towards her. She stared at it, her composure cracking like a pane of glass. I don't know what you're talking about. This has to be some kind of mistake. Junk mail. Junk mail doesn't come from a venture capital firm threatening to seize your assets," I said, my voice still level. "Junk mail doesn't detail a $150,000 debt." Leo's head whipped around to look at her, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Jenna? What is she talking about?" That's when she broke. It wasn't a slow crumble, it was a complete collapse. She sank onto the couch and the story came tumbling out in a torrent of sobs and gasps. It was a sordid tale of a failed business, of pride and foolish risks, of family medical emergencies and the crushing weight of it all. She painted a picture of herself as a victim. A desperate woman trying to keep her head above water. I was going to tell you. Leo, I swear, she cried, looking at him with wide, pleading eyes. I just didn't want to worry you. The sale of the cabin, it was going to be a surprise. A way for us to finally get a fresh start. To be free from all of this. She made it sound so noble. A fresh start. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the wood floor. A fresh start? I said, my voice finally shaking with the rage I'd been suppressing. Your fresh start was going to be built on the rubble of my life. You stood in my husband's workshop, where he poured his heart and soul into his work, and you saw nothing but price tags. You held my hand and talked about my emotional burden, while you were planning how to liquidate my husband's memory to pay off your own mistakes. I turned to my son, my heart feeling like it was breaking all over again. And you, Leo, did you know? Did you know your father was getting threatening letters in the last months of his life? Did you know he was carrying this, all while his heart was failing him? He couldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his face pale with shame. I knew we were in trouble. He mumbled, I didn't know it was this bad. She told me we just needed a little boost. A buffer. A buffer? I almost laughed. A harsh, broken sound. Leo, this isn't a buffer. This is a shipwreck, and you were willing to throw me and your father's legacy overboard just to save yourselves. That's not fair. Jenna sobbed. We are a family. Families are supposed to help each other. Help is what you ask for. I shot back. It isn't what you plot and scheme and lie to take. You came into this home, this sacred place, and you tried to strip it for parts. That's when Leo finally looked up. His eyes filled with a desperate plea that was aimed at me. But his words were for her. Mom, please, he begged, moving to stand beside his weeping wife. She made mistakes. We made mistakes. But we are drowning. You have to understand. We need this. He looked around the cabin. At the stone fireplace, the hand-hewn beams, the very soul of his childhood. It's just a building, he said, his voice cracking. It's old wood and stone. Our future has to be more important than that. Old wood and stone. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. He had taken 40 years of love, of laughter, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of his father's entire being, and reduced it to building materials. He had made his choice. In his panic, in his shame, he had sided with her. He had chosen the desperate, frantic present over the loving, permanent past. The heartbreak was absolute. It was a pain so deep and sharp. It eclipsed the grief I felt for Frank. This was a loss of the living, a loss of the boy I had raised. I want you to leave, I whispered, the words feeling heavy and foreign in my mouth. Both of you, just go. I need to think. Leo looked like I had struck him. Mom, don't do this. We can fix this. But I just shook my head, turning my back on them to face the cold, empty fireplace. Just go, I repeated, my voice hollow. I didn't turn around as I heard their hesitant footsteps, the sound of the door opening, and the final, devastating click of it closing behind them, leaving me utterly alone with the ghosts and the wreckage. The sound of their car fading down the mountain was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. I stood motionless in the middle of the room, the silence rushing back in to fill the spaces where the shouting had been. It was a crushing, absolute quiet. I sank into Frank's armchair, the one by the fireplace, and finally let the tears come. They weren't loud, ragged sobs, but a silent, steady stream of heartbreak. He had chosen her. My son had looked at 40 years of his father's love, of his own history, and called it old wood and stone. The cabin, my sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum, a cold monument to a family that no longer existed. The letters were still spread across the dining table, a stark white testament to the lies that had torn us apart. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in a fog of grief, but eventually, the afternoon sun slanted low through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I knew I couldn't leave them out. I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. With heavy limbs, I forced myself to get up and walk back to Frank's desk. I gathered the hateful collection letters, my fingers recoiling from the paper as if it were toxic. I just wanted to put them back in the dark, to hide the ugliness away. I slid open the hidden compartment, my movements slow and robotic, As I pushed the bundle of letters back inside, my knuckles brushed against something else. Tucked so far in the back I had missed it completely. It was another envelope. This one was different. It was heavy, cream-colored linen stock, not cheap printer paper. It felt important. And on the front, in my husband's strong, familiar script, was a single word, Carolyn. My heart gave a painful lurch. It was a message, a final word from him I never knew I had. With hands that shook for an entirely new reason, I carefully slid my finger under the seal and opened it. Inside were several pages of his handwriting and a thick, professionally bound document. I unfolded the letter first. My dearest Carolyn, it began. If you are reading this, it means you've found the secret compartment. And I can only guess that life has forced your hand. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry I'm not there to face this with you. I know about the letters. I've known for months. I started getting calls at the workshop. Then the letters started arriving at the house. I intercepted them. I didn't want to burden you. I kept telling myself our boy was just in a rough patch. That he'd figure it out. But I saw the way Jenna was changing him. I saw her desperation. And it scared me. I saw her looking at this cabin. At my workshop. The same way a wolf looks at a flock of sheep. I knew this day might come. A day they would come to you, panicked and desperate, and ask you to sell our anchor. To sell our soul to fix their mistakes. And I know your heart. Carolyn, I know you would be tempted to sacrifice anything for our son's happiness. That's why I had to do this. I couldn't let them sell our legacy. But I also couldn't stand by and watch our son drown. He's a good man, but he's lost his way. Tears were blurring the words on the page. I wiped them away, my heart pounding against my ribs. He had known. He had carried all of this alone. So, I made a plan. The document in this envelope is for a trust fund I set up in the last few months. It's got a little over $200,000 in it, money from some old investments I never told you about. It's more than enough to clear their debts and give them a real fresh start. But there's a condition, and this is the most important part. Carolyn, the money can't be accessed by signing a paper. It can't be used to patch a hole in a sinking ship so they can go right on sailing into the next storm. It has to be earned. The only way for Leo to unlock that trust is for him to come home. He has to work for 1 full year in our business. Right alongside you. He has to learn what it feels like to build something with his own 2 hands. Not just how to sell it off. He needs to feel the sawdust under his fingernails and the satisfaction of a finished piece. He needs to remember who he is. And where he comes from. It's not a punishment, my love. It's a roadmap back to himself. I know this is a heavy burden to place on you. But I have never known a stronger woman. You are the heart of this family. And you are the only one who can guide him home. This is my last plan. My final project. Trust your gut. Trust our love. I am with you. Always. All my love. Frank. I dropped the letter onto the desk. My hands flying to my mouth as a sob of sheer, overwhelming awe escaped me. It wasn't a sob of grief. But of wonder. My brilliant, wonderful husband. Even from beyond the grave. He was taking care of us. He hadn't just left me a memory, he had left me a solution. A plan so full of wisdom and tough love it took my breath away. He hadn't just seen the problem, he had diagnosed the disease, my son's disconnect from his own roots, and prescribed the only possible cure. He was offering Leo a chance not just to save his finances, but to save his character. I picked up the bound document. It was all there, officially notarized and legally binding. The Cedar Creek Legacy Trust. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters. A profound shift happening inside me. The despair that had crushed me just an hour before was evaporating. Replaced by a clear, steady, and powerful sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim in this story. I was not the grieving widow or the betrayed mother. I was the custodian of Frank's final wish. And the architect of my family's future. I spent the rest of that day in a state of quiet grace. Frank's letter clutched in my hand like a talisman. His love and foresight had given me more than a solution, they had given me back my strength. The path forward was no longer a tangled mess of grief and betrayal. But a single, clear line drawn by my husband's loving hand. That evening, I picked up the phone. First, I called Maria. I need you to come to the cabin tomorrow morning. I said, my voice steady. I'm going to need you. She didn't ask questions, she just said, I'll be there. Next, I called Leo. When he answered, his voice was hesitant, broken. Mom? Leo, I said, my tone calm and resolute, leaving no room for argument. You and Jenna need to come back to the cabin. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. There's something your father left for you. There was a confused silence. Then, Mom, I don't think. This is not a request. Leo, I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. This is about your father. Be here. I hung up before he could reply. The next morning, Maria arrived first, a thermos of hot coffee in her hands and quiet strength in her eyes. I showed her the letter. As she read it, tears streamed down her face. Oh, Aunt Carolyn, she whispered, Uncle Frank was one of a kind. Her presence was an anchor in the storm I knew was coming. Leo and Jenna arrived exactly at 10. Their faces a mixture of defensiveness and trepidation. They walked in as if stepping onto a stage, unsure of their roles. I was sitting at the pine dining table. In front of me lay two objects, the thick official document for the Cedar Creek Legacy Trust, and a standard blank property sale agreement I'd found in Frank's desk drawer. Sit down, I said. It wasn't a suggestion. They sat opposite me, the table feeling like a vast, empty canyon between us. Jenna started to speak, a pre-rehearsed apology already forming on her lips. But I held up a hand to stop her. Yesterday, this was about your choices. I began, my voice even. Today, this is about your father's. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply picked up Frank's letter and began to read. I read his words about knowing their struggle, about his heartbreak over the path they had chosen, and about his unwavering belief in the goodness still inside his son. The only sound in the room was my voice and the crackle of the fire Maria had started in the hearth. Leo stared at the floor, his whole body rigid with shame. Jenna's face was a pale, unreadable mask. When I finished reading, I pushed the trust document towards the center of the table. Your father knew you were drowning, I said, looking directly at Leo. He left you a lifeline. Over $200,000. Enough to clear every debt and start over. Truly fresh. A gasp escaped Jenna's lips. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from the document to my face. This was it, the easy answer, the miracle. But, I said, my voice holding the full weight of Frank's legacy. He did not leave you a lottery ticket. He left you a challenge. I tapped the document. You get it all, Leo, but only after you give 1 year of your life to the business your father built. You come home, you work with me, you learn what it is to create something of value, not just how to sell it. Then, I picked up the blank sales contract and placed it next to the trust. Or, I said, my voice softening, there is this option. We sell the cabin. Today, the market is high. You'll walk away with enough cash to solve your problems immediately. It's the practical choice. The easy way out. The choice hung in the air between them. Stark and absolute. Legacy or currency. Character or cash. Jenna found her voice first. Leo, the trust it's incredible, she said, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and calculation. But a year? A whole year? Your father, he was a wonderful man. But he didn't understand the pressure we're under. The interest on that loan is piling up every single day. We don't have a year. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. We could be free of this. Leo, right now, we could sign that paper and walk away from this nightmare today. Her plea was desperate and logical. It was the voice of pure, panicked survival. I said nothing. Maria, from her chair by the fire, simply watched, her hands folded in her lap. This was not our decision to make. All of Frank's love, all of my pain, all of their mistakes, had led to this single moment. And it belonged to Leo alone. He looked at Jenna's pleading face, then at the two documents on the table. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the creek where his father had taught him to fish. His back was to us, his shoulders tense. I could almost see the war raging inside him, the pull of his wife's desperation against the echo of his father's words. He was choosing what kind of man he was going to be. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, he turned around. His eyes were clear, and for the first time in a very long time, he looked like my son again. He looked like Frank's son. He walked back to the table, gently moved the sales contract aside. and placed his hand firmly on the thick, bound document of the trust. "We've been looking for an easy way out, Jen," he said, his voice quiet but full of a newfound strength. "I think that's been the problem all along." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound, sorrowful respect. "It's time to build something again, instead of just selling things off." He had made his choice. Jenna stared at him, stunned into a shocked silence. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the quiet, dawning realization that the rules had just fundamentally changed. In the warm, quiet cabin, surrounded by his father's memory, my son had finally come home. That difficult day at the cabin wasn't an ending. It was a painful, necessary, and ultimately beautiful beginning. It's been 8 months since Leo made his choice, and the silence that once haunted my house has been replaced by the lively, purposeful sounds of a family rebuilding itself from the foundation up. Our lives didn't magically get easier. There was no sudden windfall of cash, and the shadow of their debt still lingers. But everything is different now. Because we are different. Leo moved back to Asheville. He and Jenna sold their expensive Chicago condo, and the modest profit took a small bite out of their mountain of debt. They now rent a small apartment downtown. And for the first time in their marriage, they are truly partners, tackling the problem together instead of looking for an escape route. Most days, you can find Leo right where his father used to be, in the workshop behind my house. He's surrounded by the scent of cedar and sawdust. His hands, once soft from city life, now calloused and capable. Frank's trust wasn't just a challenge, it was a gift of purpose. Leo has a natural talent for woodworking, a deep, inherited understanding of the grain and character of the wood. He's not just building furniture, he's building a connection to the father he thought he'd lost and a respect for himself I haven't seen in years. There is a quiet confidence in him now, a satisfaction that comes only from creating something real and lasting. Jenna's transformation is quieter, but no less profound. She works a steady job at a local accounting firm during the week. But on Saturdays, she comes to the workshop. She doesn't offer unsolicited business advice or assess the value of things anymore. Instead, she sweeps the floors, organizes invoices, and has painstakingly learned how to manage the shipping for our online orders. She's using her sharp mind not to scheme, but to contribute. The other day, she brought me a coffee, just the way I like it, without me having to ask. "The sales from last quarter are up 15%, she said, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Your husband built a really amazing brand, Carolyn." It was the first time she had called him my husband, not just Frank or Leo's dad. It was a small shift, but it meant the world. The trust between us is a fragile thing, being rebuilt one honest day at a time. But for the first time, I believe it's possible. Last month, the three of us drove up to the cabin. We didn't go to pack or appraise. We went to open the windows, sweep the porch, and listen to the creek. We sat around the stone fireplace, and Leo told stories about his dad, stories I thought he had forgotten. The cabin was no longer a piece of real estate in dispute, it was our anchor once again, holding us steady. I look at my life now and I see the incredible wisdom in my husband's final plan. He knew that true wealth isn't a number in a bank account that can be spent and lost. It's the skill in your hands, the pride in your work, and the strength of the family standing beside you. He didn't just save his legacy, he resurrected his son. Sometimes, I stand in the doorway of the workshop and watch Leo, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carves a piece of maple. I see my husband in the line of his shoulders and the patience in his hands. I am not a grieving widow anymore. And I am not a betrayed mother. I am the proud matriarch of a family that was tested, that was broken, and that chose to be whole again. We chose legacy over currency, and strength over convenience, and that is a foundation that no debt, no lie, and no amount of money can ever break.